Welcome, my fellow Bleach heads. Bleach Jump Festa is right around the corner, and I believe we are all hyped. I know Kubo is. Before we get into the video, please like and subscribe, drop a comment, because I need that exposure to grow the channel. I appreciate it, trust me. In the last video, I stated there was a 5-way tie, which is true, but originally it was 6. I'll explain how number 5 was able to remove itself from the tie, so let's jump right in. Here's my 2 cents, whether you want it or not. So this part is not so much a tie, but when it comes to the ability of these Schrifts to defeat one another, we run into an interesting scenario. So I'm going to post a 5-way tie here. As you can see, things may seem in their correct order. However, the Compulsory causes a huge issue when it comes to the biggest factor, head-to-head matchups. So the Compulsory is probably one of the single most broken physical type abilities that I can think of. Again, these Schrifts are removed from their wielder, but technically, like the Miracle or the Visionary, the Compulsory isn't a Schrift, it is their innate ability. However, I decided to add them because they are abilities that theoretically could be bestowed by Yuha, so in this scenario, think of them as that. Just to give the proper perspective, I'm going to explain the Compulsory. The Compulsory works by shooting nerves from the body and extending them into the opponent's body, where they can forcibly control the opponent's movements and can tear their body to shreds near instantaneously. Using this power, you could instantly crush the body of an enemy into just a small ball of flesh. It can also be used to severely warp a victim's body. Anything touched by these nerves can also be assimilated into the user, either by absorbing the entire being or just a portion. Everything assimilated will then grant the wielder its abilities, memories, intelligence, physical attributes, etc. It can also send nerves into inorganic objects in order to control and shape them, which it could create giant arms and hands out of the ground in nearby buildings to attack its opponent with, giving it some long-range capability. Basically, assimilate, control, and adapt, grow. With that explanation, I think you can see why I have a problem, but if you still don't, I'll just explain. If you in this instance had the Compulsory and you had to fight the first 3 Schrifts listed here, you're probably going to get stomped pretty hard. The Deathdealing might not seem like it's horribly dangerous on the surface, but that's what makes it horrifying. The moment you step in this domain, you're already at a disadvantage even with the Compulsory. Not to mention, the Compulsory's biggest advantage is its weakness. Its exposed nerves can still feel pain on a very raw level and are still organic and can be damaged. The Deathdealing would be able to kill and damage nerves directly without ever having to touch them. The Deathdealing also has long-range ways to poison, with attacks like gift balls that we've seen Askin use effectively on people like Grimmjow, Ichigo, and Yoriichi. The nerves would shrivel and die under the heat, and I couldn't imagine raw exposed nerves burning away. Manipulating the ground wouldn't be effective either, seeing as Burning Stomp and other abilities are hard enough to turn stone into lava. Also, the heat can fight the close-range Compulsory from far away. The Explode doesn't need an explanation. It does what the heat does, but on a far better and a much more destructive scale. I think these Schrifts all perform similarly enough in the combat scenarios versus the Compulsory, but edge it out in the head-to-head matchup. However, this is where the tie issue comes up. The Miracle messes everything up. The Miracle has no problem handling the Explode and the heat. Theoretically, the Miracle could go either way against the Deathdealing, but I'd lean closer to it losing. However, 10 times out of 10, I believe someone with the Miracle absolutely gets destroyed by the Compulsory. The Miracle performs the same in a 1v1, 1v team versus team scenario as the Compulsory does, but in head-to-head, it stands no chance. The Miracle grants no long-range advantage over the Compulsory, and actually is at an extreme disadvantage there. Ultimately, the Compulsory will always be able to even the playing field or completely overwhelm the Miracle. In a scenario where, let's say, the Compulsory only gets a small portion of the opponent and the Miracle could regrow that portion stronger than ever, the Compulsory just even the playing field because it now has access to the Miracle ability. It wouldn't then take long for the Miracle to overwhelm and consume the Compulsory. You can't come back from assimilation, and even if you were to argue or believe that it could, it would just come down to a draw then. And that still favors the Compulsory because eventually the Compulsory would adapt to the situation. So then if the Compulsory were to fight the other Schrifts with the Miracle ability, it would dominate them. So this is my problem. The miracle walls and defeats all of the Schrifts under it, with the extreme exception of the love, the zombie, and the glut, but is soundly defeated by the compulsory. However, I can't put the compulsory higher than D, E, or H because it either loses 99% of the time or 100% of the time just under its own merit, which is what the point of this video. So the order that I've settled on is 10 the compulsory, 9 the heat, 8 the deathdealing, and 7 the explode. I couldn't put the heat above the deathdealing because eventually the deathdealing would be able to adapt to the flames and become immune to it, actually become stronger from it. But I don't think that applies to the explode. And the reason the explode gets number 7 over the heat isn't my personal bias for Bambietta at all, I promise. But it's because the explode does what the heat does on a much larger scale, and to be fair, much better. And that's the reason it is at number 7 as opposed to number 8. Number 6 again explains itself. The miracle will beat all of these with really no difficulty whatsoever. Although I do have to add, if you have watched my miracle theory video about Girard, I don't think this is actually how the miracle works, but I'm just going to go with how everyone else thinks it works for this video. If you want a bit more of an in-depth explanation, just ask in the comment section. Finally, we're getting to the top 5. Now, this was very difficult, and clearly I will explain when we get to them, but I've actually changed the top 5 quite a few times, and it's really only been spots 2, 3, and 4. I've kind of mixed and matched them because I thought of so many different scenarios in my head, but I'll explain it when I get there. Number 5. Starting off the top 5 and the Schrift that broke away from the other 5, we have X, the X-axis. Now, this is my second favorite Schrift. I love how cool this is. This Schrift is like playing in your backyard as a kid and being like, haha, you can't shoot me, but I can shoot you, like, kind of ability. The ability allows someone to phase through any attack that isn't an ability itself. For example, all physical strikes, energy blasts, and seals are useless. The only way to touch this Schrift is with an ability. In Bleach, there is a distinct difference between techniques and abilities. Jugrim and Yuha explain it best. Kiryu Hikafune's Cage of Life instantly absorbs all spirit energy. Therefore, it absorbs anything like a Getsuga Tensho, Quincy arrows, Yamamoto's flames, etc. because they are made of spirit energy. But an ability is something that has an effect, like the result of a spell, for example. In this case, it was Yuha's Ashvalan Light, which isn't a Reishi-based attack, it is simply an ability with an effect. So it passed through the Cage of Life with no problem. This is essentially the only way to touch the X-axis. You see this with Shinsui's Bankai. Its offensive ability is just as broken, however. Anything that is in the way of the X-axis when it is activated is instantaneously erased. No burning, no piercing, no process of degradation, just pure erasure. The Schrift literally cannot be defeated by any Schrift below it, except for possibly Lloyd's the Yourself. Now, the reason it broke from the tie group is because although the Miracle and the X-axis has an indeterminable end in a head-to-head, it does not have a loss to any single Schrift under it like the Miracle does. However, the X-axis would not be able to defeat any Schrift above it more than they could it, so it's comfortably here at number 5. Coming in at number 4, we have A, the Antithesis. So before this, I knew the Antithesis was going to be high on the list, but at 4, it kind of surprised me. The Antithesis can designate any 2 targets and completely reverse anything that has already occurred between 2 of them. It does not have to be the user, it can be really anything in the environment. Feasibly, this Schrift can do battle with any Schrift and win. However, it doesn't give a decisive advantage. It mostly works as a counter, but as we've seen, when this Schrift battled the balance, there is only so much damage it can take. Plus, the disadvantage is it requires the user to wait and choose what to reverse. You will mostly be on the back foot using this ability. It has some offensive viability, but it's too gimmicky for me to put it any higher than 4. At number 3, we have the Balance. This Schrift has actually done battle with Schrifts in the manga and has come out on top. Granted, the Balance isn't granted the Frun Shield, so it won't be able to increase the damage reversal back on the Antithesis like it did in the manga, but it is designed to just perfectly counter everything from the X-axis all the way down to the overkill on this list. It is the perfect counter for the Antithesis, and it's actually what got the balance the number 3 spot. It's because it performs far better in a head-to-head than the Antithesis does with other Schrifts. It also, I believe, would put up a much better fight against the number 2 slot. Landing comfortably at number 2, we have V, the Visionary. So I was dead set on putting this at number 4. I believe the weaknesses of this Schrift would lead it to lose to the other 2 below it, but when I thought about it, neither Schrift could take on the infinite arsenal and variety that the Visionary has. Anything one can imagine is almost instantly weaponized. Like, I tried to justify how the balance or the Antithesis could possibly stop, say, a meteor like Gremmy pulled off in the manga, and the only one who could was the balance, but again, that wasn't a full counter that I came up with, so the Visionary is just overwhelming. The problem with the Schrift that may not seem obvious though is losing focus. Sure, it's easy to say I can imagine thousands of ways to win, but the discipline to give it form, control, and sustain it are far more difficult. Gremmy's lack of ability, lack of experience, and fight IQ completely undermined his powers, and this showed off the weakness greatly. That isn't a weakness shared by straightforward abilities like you see with the X-axis or the Explode, and that's why I put it where it is. But truthfully, it can't go higher than 2, because we all know what number 1 is. Finally, here at number 1, we have the Almighty. I mean, the Almighty is just so broken that, like, even in its weakened state, it's still one of the most powerful Schrifts on this list. It gives anyone the ability to see the future. Even in its weakened state, it can see events more than 24 hours into the future. It's scary. At its strongest, something as powerful as the Visionary is mere child's play. With the ability to pick from an infinite possibility future and apply it to reality is broken. It's kind of like what I'm doing with these videos. I'm editing them. I can completely control what's going on. You could play around and counter everything the Visionary comes up with, or just basically create an infinite way of one-shotting your opponent, or just make every ability null and void. It gets a perfect score in every category: 1v1, 1v-team, team versus team, and in the head-to-head. No other Schrift met that categorical. Man, I don't even know why I'm continuing. You know what I was going to say. It's unbeatable. So it comfortably sits at number 1 as the most powerful Schrift in the series. Thanks for tuning in, folks. I had fun doing this list. I hope you all hated it, because I want to hear what you think. Please let me know what you think, because I love a friendly debate down in the comments. Be on the lookout for my Ichigo versus Naruto Death Battle react. I'm going to try to get it on Christmas, maybe Christmas Eve. We'll see. Like and subscribe, please. Have a wonderful day. Bye, folks.